Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to our talk. Today, the topic is Snow White, the later years. And this was on my mind because I was thinking about what happens when you get to kind of the middle years. I'm 54, and so kind of in the middle of my story. But you really never know what the middle of your story is, right? Because, like, if I took a bite out of a poison apple today, then the middle of my story would have been like when I was 27. And if the middle of my story is today, then I'm going to live to be 108. Obviously, I certainly hope that's the case. But, I'm not a kid. I've been through some things. And I have so many friends, and certainly myself, right? You reach this point in life and you sort of expect things to feel a certain way or to be a certain way or to look a certain way. And for so many of us, like, things are not feeling the way we thought that they would. And, there's so many different reasons that you might relate to that. You might not, of course. But a lot of women I know who are at this age are having that feeling. And it got me thinking about stories generally. And part of it is I was reading something that one of my close friends had written about her divorce. She went through a divorce for her second divorce. And it was certainly not something that she had anticipated or planned for or wanted. And she said something about how in her mind she had thought her husband was going to keep her safe. And so it got my wheels spinning about this whole idea of safety and our perception of things and the stories that we grew up hearing. And I always like to take a look at those anyway, the fairy tales, the stories that are kind of like in the lexicon, or the stories of like whatever we grew up with hearing. And certainly for me, and I'm sure for many of you, some of those fairy tales are like Snow White, which is the one that I was looking at this week. But I mean, all of them, if you look like, Hansel and Gretel or Sleeping Beauty or, like Beauty and the Beast, the stuff that we were immersed in growing up is so interesting to examine as an adult, because you, of course, are looking at things through a different lens. And some of these fairy tales are things I'll go back and look at the original and be shocked, right? Like, what? So this week I started to think about Snow White. I was thinking about like how we always get left at the beginning of the story, right? It's like there's some damsel in distress, the prince shows up, the knight in shining armor, whatever it is, slays the dragon, rescues the princess, Rapunzel, whatever, and they live happily ever after, right? There's a giant wedding, everyone from across the land comes, and that's the end, right? But that's the beginning. That's the beginning of the story. And that's where we all that's where we got left in the story. And so I like to sort of think about what ended up happening. And that is what I decided to do this week, is to play with the story of Snow White. And the first thing I did was go back and look at the original. And one of the things that struck me right away is that the evil queen, and I'm, listen, if you haven't read Snow White for a while, I'm sure it'll come back to you, but the evil queen, she's marries the king. The king has a daughter. The queen, his wife died in childbirth, which is common theme. And now he's married this woman, and we have the evil stepmother, which is another fairy tale, archetype. We meet this character a lot, but here she comes, and she's not long after they get married, the king dies. And in the original Snow White, it's pretty out there that she kills him. His death is mysterious, but it's pretty widely understood in the original Snow White that the second wife has done away with him some way or another. And then she has the mirror on the wall. And there, asks the mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all, right? And one day the mirror says, Snow White. Snow White is 7 years old. I don't recall that. Maybe I knew that at some point. I do not recall that at any time as I was growing up. Even in like the Disney animated films, she looks much older. She looks like a young woman. In the story, she is a 7-year-old child that the evil queen tells the huntsman, take her and kill her and bring me back her lungs and her liver. I have to be the fairest in the land. Okay, so I don't, we can talk about that all day. Like, how vain do you have to be to want to kill a 7-year-old child? Yeah. So the huntsman takes Snow White into the forest, and he can't do it. He can't do it. He can't bring himself to kill this little girl. So he tells her to run, right? And he thinks, well, she's probably going to meet her end anyway, because there's a 7-year-old child in the woods and there's wild animals everywhere in the forest, right? So off Snow White goes, and the huntsman, brings back the lungs and liver of a wild boar. And Snow White finds the cottage with the 7 dwarves and goes in. They're not there. She makes a giant mess and she falls asleep on their little beds. They come back from the mines. The dwarves work in the mines and find her asleep in their bed. Again, it's a theme that we see a lot, where you think about Goldilocks, right? And she explains the situation to them. My stepmother has sent me to the woods to be killed, and I have nowhere to go. I'm not safe. And they make this arrangement like, oh, you're going to stay here. And she says, I'll help with the household chores, do whatever. So they, out of their compassion and kindness, the 7 dwarves, they take her in and they fall in love with her. They adore her. She's sweet, sweet girl, and she's doing her best here to make things nice for them. Even Grumpy falls in love with her. And so they're living peacefully and happily together and working. The dwarves are working in the mines at night, and Snow White's taking care of things, and they come back and there's, food ready. And it's just a mutually beneficial situation. She's safe. They have love. Everything's okay. Well, the mirror on the wall has to screw everything up, because the evil queen asks who's the fairest, and the mirror says Snow White, and the queen says, what are you talking about? Snow White's dead. And the mirror says, nope, she's not. She's living in the forest with the 7 dwarves. So then we know the story. Evil queen goes, gives her, it's a longer story. She goes and does a few different things. It's not her opening shot there with the apple, and the dwarves are telling Snow White, you got to be careful. She's coming for you. But she uses dark magic, dresses up, and Snow White takes a bite of the poison apple. So now we have Snow White, who is now, she's got the sleeping death. She's in a coma, essentially. And the 7 dwarves cannot bear to bury her. They're hoping some miraculous way she's going to wake up. So they put her in a glass coffin in the forest right outside the cottage. And that is where she remains for 7 years. So she's now 14. And one day, a 31-year-old prince comes, you know, going through the forest, and he sees a 14-year-old girl in a glass coffin in a coma and decides this is the one for me. And there are different versions in the story. In some versions, he's trying to get the seven dwarfs to sell her to him and they refuse. In others, he's got his servants lifting the glass coffin and bringing it back to the castle. However it happens, he convinces them to open the coffin and allow him to give her, quote unquote, true love's kiss, which wakes her up. And, of course, she falls madly in love with him because this is a fairy tale written by men. It's the Grimm brothers, right? This is what we're hearing now. So she falls in love with him and she goes back to the castle and they get married and live, as we all know, happily ever after, right? This is what we are sold. This is the story. There's more to the original story. The evil queen is invited to the wedding and the prince sends her these iron slippers to wear, and the iron slippers also have dark magic, and she starts dancing and she can't stop and she ends up dancing till she dies at the wedding. So there's a lot of dark stuff here, which they took out in the, Disney version. But bottom line, okay, is even in the Disney version, we are growing up being told, this is a love story. And, just full stop for a minute. Like, this is a love story and that's true love's kiss. A 31-year-old man sees a 14-year-old girl in a glass coffin who cannot consent. She's not even awake. And he decides this is the one. I'm going to kiss her. And, this is their beginning. And we're being taught this is like a good love story. This is good stuff. And then they're going to go to the castle. And of course, what more could she want? She's going to marry a prince. She's going to eventually become queen. She's going to go live in a castle. She's going to have this beautiful life. He rescues her from her sleeping death, from her coma. I mean, give me a break here. I have a 15-year-old daughter. Let me tell you something. If my daughter is asleep, I don't want any 31-year-old men around my daughter, period. So we have a lot of problems here, but this is what we're being, we're being raised to believe. These are good stories. These are not good stories. And a lot of, I think, what has happened in our culture is, and these fairy tales, they're told everywhere. They're not just here, but it's like, this is the water that we're swimming in. And there are so many messages like this coming at us all the time that you're not even questioning this stuff. You're not even thinking to yourself, wait a second, like, is this a good story? Or, it's not just that story. It's all of them. I'm actually thinking about doing kind of like a revisiting of a whole bunch of the most famous fairy tales and checking in on these, our heroines, 10 years later, 15 years later, which is why I called the essay this week, Snow White, 15 years later, the later years is the title. Because, as a grown person, you can look back at this stuff and say, like, of course that's not a good beginning. Of course there's some problematic things here, wildly problematic. And it's obviously not just fairy tales. It's all the stuff that we're hearing all the time. If you think about the messaging even toward girls and women about keeping yourself safe, it's like thinking about, well, don't leave your drink unattended. if you're out somewhere. And, don't ever like put yourself in a situation where you're walking home alone at night. Be careful about what you're wearing. Where's the conversation about for the guys? Where's the conversation about what they need to be doing? Like, we just don't, everything is skewed. And when you're in water like that, I was having a conversation with Paul Crenshaw last night, incredible writer, and he was talking about that. Like, he was teaching at university for a long time, and that in the orientation at colleges, these girls, they were going to these classes about like how to keep yourself safe and make sure you're in the buddy system and all that stuff. And there's no conversation for the guys about what there's no course for them. There's no class for them to take about, how to like not make other people unsafe, girls and women. How about that conversation? And I was talking about, I wrote an essay months ago called Moving Violations. And there was, at one of the things I was writing about, I was at the eye doctor with my son. And there were these two men, older guys, white dudes, and they're probably in their 60s. You couldn't tell you for sure, but that's about how old they looked. And the receptionist was there, and she's like there behind the desk, and I'm there in the waiting area with my son waiting to go in. And these guys are like, she's doing things, right? She's working. She's at work. So she's making copies of stuff. She's back there. She's like answering phones. She's writing things down. And these guys are like, they're talking to her. They're, like hanging out there by the desk. And they're saying things to her like, so how long have you been working here? And she's like, oh, I've been here 20 years. I've been with the doctor. And like, wow, like, when did you start? Were you like 12 when you started? And she's doing that thing that women do when you're in a situation where you're trapped, you're at work, so you're limited in what you can say. You can't be like, you know what, could you go away? I'm working, because she's in this, she doesn't want to get fired, so she can't be rude to the patients. But I'm a woman, right? And I'm watching her, and she can't, there's nowhere she's stuck. And they will not leave her alone. And they just went on and on, like, wow, you look really young. And like, how old are you? And she's like, well, I'm not going to answer that question, but I didn't start working here when I was 12, and it just didn't stop. And the rage I was feeling sitting there watching her, because I've been in that situation so many times in my life where you're stuck, you're trapped, and there's nothing that you can't really express the rage you're feeling, because if you do, you're going to get fired. It's infuriating. And I turned to my son, and my son, this is the only thing that kept me sane in that moment, was just shaking his head. So I felt really thankful that I've raised a young man who understands, like I didn't even have to say anything to him. He was watching this and also feeling like absolutely disgusted. And I do think that there are, there are people who are talking to their sons about what it's like. And there are men who are aware and having these conversations and trying to shift things out there for people, who understand what it's like for their mothers, for their sisters, for their daughters, for their friends, for their partners. But not enough. Not enough. We need everybody having this conversation. And it's one of the reasons for me that I'm so devastated to watch what's happening in this country with the SAVE Act, for example, and I touched on this stuff in the essay too, in my imagined like checking in on Snow White in the later years. I've got her at 29 and her own daughter is 14. same age she was when, she met her now husband. And of course, this is just my fantasy playing out of, how things would be for her at this point. And I also made it like present day because I'm making the rules, right? If I'm rewriting the fairy tale, I can make it whatever I want it to be. Um, but this idea, and I see comments sometimes from people and they're like, what's the big deal? Just get a passport. First of all, like getting a passport costs money. Not everyone has expendable income like that. And it depends on where you are and what state you're in too. But you're talking about at least like if you don't have a passport at all and you're talking about having to get like your passport photos taken and going and doing, you're probably talking about $250. And that's even if you can, it's going to take time, weeks, months, like everything's backed up now because so many people are getting fired, so many federal workers and so many different government agencies. And this is essentially, it's a tax on women to go and vote. If I have to do something in order to vote that my son doesn't have to do, or my, like, why is that okay? Why is it like, how is this okay? Why am I in a position where if I've gotten married and my last name doesn't match my birth certificate and I don't have a passport, why do I have to now go and do something that a man doesn't have to do to prove my citizenship? Like, why can't I go with my birth certificate, my marriage certificate? Like, what's going on here? Why are we making it harder for women to vote? And why are we, casually, and I've seen women leaving these comments. What's the big deal? Just get your passport already. The privilege is showing left and right. It really is. Well, right and right. It's showing a lot. And it's not pretty, it's really not. And it's worth looking at. I saw this immigration attorney had posted something about, if you're a US citizen and you get detained by ICE, you do not need an immigration attorney. You need a civil rights attorney. It's your civil rights that are being violated. You are a citizen. You don't need an immigration attorney, right? And people were commenting underneath, why would a US citizen get detained by ICE? And it's like, you're not thinking about how things are for other people. Have you never gone out to walk your dog and not brought your wallet with you and not been white? That's how it happens. Have you ever gone to mail an envelope, right? Like just gone to the mailbox and not brought your wallet with you and not been white? It's like, people are getting approached on the street. Guys are just pulling up in vans. And if you don't have proof of citizenship, that's how you get detained, even as a US citizen. It just happened yesterday, to this guy who's in Florida. I mean, if you're paying attention, you'll see these things are happening all the time. And it's really scary. And I think one of the things that really is going so wrong generally in the world, not just in this country, is that thing of not thinking about how things are for other people. Even, just taking a beat and really thinking for a second. I know how things are for me. Before I have a reaction, before I express my very strong opinion or before I write, fire off this obnoxious response, can I just take a second and just wonder for a minute, like, am I thinking about how it might be for someone else? Or am I just assuming how things are for me is how things are for everyone? And can I possibly pause? There just isn't a lot of that going on anymore. People are, and I look, online is, it's rough out there. It's rough out there in person sometimes for people just to try to have conversations. Families are breaking up over this stuff. People are really losing the ability just to communicate with each other. And part of it is that, conversation about like, look, we can disagree over pizza toppings, but we can't disagree over how we're treating people. And I agree with that. I'm going to tell you, I posted something this week, and I'm struggling sometimes too with like what to say and where to say it. If you read my stuff, then I've been very vocal, and I can't not be. Like, that's just not something. I've reached a point in my life and in my practice where if I'm seeing things that are deeply distressing, that are harmful to people, yeah, I'm going to call it out. The way that I see it, I'm going to say it. And it took me a long time to get there, especially as a woman, I'll tell you, because I think so many of us, certainly from my generation, from Gen X, and any generation prior, and I think still to this day, there's a lot of pressure on girls and women to be good, to be nurturing, to be kind, to be caretaking, to think about other people. That is what when you're talking about like a reward system and how society rewards you as a girl or a woman. And it was getting better. We're having a major backlash now, but that is largely what you're going to get your reward for, is that kind of thing. Like how giving are you? How kind are you? How nurturing are you? How selfless can you be? And all of those brass rings, and I did that for such a long time in my life because that's what I was taught growing up. I was taught like the brass rings that's how you are going to be happy, right? You get the straight A's, you starve yourself so you look right, you find a partner, you find that right person who's going to complete you, and you're going to be good, you're going to be polite. I grew up in two different households where it was very much like about other people. So if somebody came in and wanted a hug, even if it was like the husband of a friend of my parents or something, and I didn't feel comfortable, it didn't matter if I didn't feel comfortable. You're going to hug this person. They want a hug. You're taught to like override your own feelings and your own intuition to make other people comfortable. If someone makes a disgusting joke, you smile, or like you don't make that person have to feel the discomfort of their own disgusting behavior. You save them from their own embarrassment. Like that is how a lot of us were raised. So I had to unlearn a lot of that. And sometimes that messaging and that pattern, it's really deep, and it still requires work because it's what I was saying earlier, like that water that you're swimming in. And I watched, I don't know if any of you saw this, but Naomi Watts, there was this clip that was, I think it went pretty viral, Bill Murray, and they were on like Andy Cohen, and I think they just did a film together. And someone called in and, said to her, like, what's your best, on-screen kiss or something? And Bill Murray, like, literally, like, accosted her. He grabbed her head and kissed her on the mouth, like, during the interview. And she laughed in that way women laugh when they're like, how do I save this? What do I do right now? We're like on a live, this thing is being recorded. This man just grabbed me and kissed me on the mouth. Like, how do I fix it? How do I make this okay? How do I try to act like I have some agency here? And sometimes like that's the best thing you can figure out to do is to act like you don't mind. And that's sad because, obviously like a better thing is like, hey, like, what are you doing? You don't grab my head and kiss me on the mouth. I didn't say that was okay. Like, don't do that. Don't touch me, but then things get really uncomfortable for everyone, right? So we're taught not to do that. We're taught not to allow ourselves that rage or that, just legitimate, I am not an object that you can just take and do what you want to do. Like, I am not a comatose, person in a like glass coffin that you can just kiss because you feel like it. Like, and I grew up in an environment, and I used to think it was because I grew up in New York City. And then as I started writing about these issues, I've had so many women tell me too, from everywhere in the world. So it's not just big cities like New York, it's everywhere. And, things like what I'm describing, where when I was really little, like 8, or like I'd have guys exposing themselves to me, like this man in Central Park when I was 8 years old, and a guy on a public bus when I was 10. And when I was 13, this guy grabbed me in a stairwell, and, I got away, but not before he really scared me. He put his hand over my mouth. He was rubbing himself up against me. He told me not to move. I'm 13. I had braces. He just grabbed me, and I think he really thought I would just stand there and let him do what he wanted to do until he was done. And I was terrified, and I had experiences where I did not get away. And so I know what I'm talking about here, and it's rough out there. It is rough out there, and it's not okay. And now we're going backward here in this country. Like, we weren't even nearly where we needed to be. And now we're dialing things back. And, I'm angry and I'm heartbroken and furious and all the things, and dismayed. And there's just some really strange thinking out there. And I posted something, that's what I was starting to say, about this whole idea of being anti-DEI. Okay. And I'll talk about that for a second. Diversity, right? Equity and inclusion. That's what DEI is. So to be proudly saying, I am against that, I'm against diversity, just kind of like pause for a second and imagine saying proudly, I'm against diversity. I don't like diversity. I want everything to be homogenous. I don't like things to be diverse. I'm not into that. I don't like equity. I don't want things to be equitable for people. It's not okay. I'm against that. I like certain people to have advantages. I don't want everybody to have equal access to like a good education or clean air or drinkable water. I'm against that. Or like good infrastructure so they can get to school or get to a job. I'm against that. I don't like that. If there's a job available, I don't want like everyone to have access to be able to go and apply for that job. I only want some people to be able to do that. Inclusion, like I'm not into that. I don't like inclusion. I don't want people to be proudly like, yeah, I'm against that, is so strange. Like, that is really not anything to be proud of, or it's bizarre to be saying I'm against those things. Those are not like, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's just like, yeah, I appreciate the differences in life. I know that we're not all the same, and we don't all come from the same place. We don't all think about things in the same way. We don't all have the same backgrounds. We don't all believe the same things. It's like, that's what makes life interesting. like that's what makes, like, that's how you learn things. And that's how you are, your worldview opens, right? Is when you're exposed to like another way of thinking about something or looking at something, or when you realize like, oh, wow, like other people don't believe this. They believe something completely different. That's really interesting. Let me learn about that. Let me open my mind to that, like that's really, I hadn't thought about things that way before. That's how you expand. And it's beautiful, right? That's the interesting stuff of life. When people start to say, I only want certain people to have rights, and I only want certain people to have access, and I only want certain people to be included. If you look at history, that is always when things get really terrifying. And the people that start to promote that ideology are never the good guys, ever. Like, you just have to look back in time, this is not, you don't have to look far. So, and even in our own country, we have Jim Crow. Like, you don't have to even look elsewhere. You don't have to look outside of what even has been happening here. So that's the part of this whole conversation. And I posted something, about what's happening in our schools and with the superintendents and this whole sort of like extortion, basically. Like, hey, if you want federal funding for, public schools, and then you need to sign off. You've got 10 days to sign off on our anti-DEI policies or no funding for you. It's like, one of the things you never want is the government to be telling schools what their curriculum can be. You do not want that. That's another thing. If you just look historically, you, again, do not have to look far. When the government of a country starts controlling the curriculum of schools, that's when you start getting indoctrination. And it's not pretty, folks. So I posted something about what's happening. And it's not just happening at like the universities, it's happening like K through 12. Those schools are being targeted. My kids went to public schools here in Santa Monica, and they've gotten an unbelievable education. We are very lucky. We're very fortunate here. And there's a lot of that. Like anyway, there's so much odd conversation out there where people are believing things they see on the internet, and they don't actually then listen to people who are living in these places and going to these schools. So it's like, I can tell you, I've got 2 kids that went through the school system, and these teachers are unbelievable. They're so great. And it's one of the things that makes living here so amazing is the school system. But I posted something about this whole topic, and someone underneath it wrote, one of the first comments was incredibly racist, and I'm certainly not going to repeat it, but I blocked instantly. And I then said, if you post, racist stuff here, I'm going to block instantly. And somebody responded underneath and said, oh, how yogic of you. So if someone disagrees with you, you're just going to block. And I was like, hey, like, listen, I don't know if what your understanding is of the yoga practice, but tolerating racism is not it. Okay. Ahimsa is like non-harming, right? I have people who want to be part of this conversation. I am certainly going to make sure they are not going to have to be exposed to that kind of harmful language. And I'm not, if you think holding space, sometimes this like language that's there, this, pseudo therapeutic, oh, you have to hold space, you have to like hold love for people. No. If you are talking about, I don't think people who are not white deserve the same rights, then no, I'm not holding space for you. You can certainly like go work your stuff out and really work it out, do some serious soul searching, and we can try again down the line. But there's no space for you in this conversation with me. If that is where you are lost. Like, I'm not having a conversation with you if that's what you think, because you're not ready to have a conversation with me. If you think that only people of a certain color deserve to have rights, you're not ready to have a conversation yet. I can't. There's no conversation for us to have yet. I can certainly send you love and hope that you find your way. But if that's genuinely where you're coming from and what you think, that's not a conversation that I'm going to be having with you right now, because there's a million other conversations I need to be having. And that is such a basic, deep, disturbing, soul level, deficit going on there. Like something's genuinely, and I understand people, sometimes you grow up in an environment where that's what you're being taught. And I certainly hey, all the love, if that is the crappy card you drew. It's not like I don't, I understand. Sometimes you're just born into a family and that's the environment that you're growing up in. But at a certain point, you've got to come out of that and start examining what you were taught. We all do, right? I certainly did. I learned a lot of things in my family of origin that I then grew up and questioned. And that's part of using your critical thinking and going out into the world and questioning, some of what you were raised to think or believe. And, if we're talking about grown adults, which I am, then yeah, you've got to do a little more work there before we can have a reasonable conversation. I have been trying for a long time now, as anybody who's been reading my stuff or, listening to the podcast, I've been trying to have conversations with people who voted for someone who said he likes to grab women by the pussy. Even that, I don't understand how. I don't understand how you could vote for someone who would say something like that. I don't. I'm already done at that point. And even if you weren't done then, there have been a million other things along the way, making fun of somebody who's differently able. I can't, this is just not, I can't. Someone who, screws people left and right and puts companies out of business, and lies and cheats and is just over and over again. I'm not, yeah. So but I was still in the conversation and still trying. And now I'm just kind of hey, right now my concern is how do we try to keep people safe? That's where I'm at. And watching the country that I love, just watching things that I never thought I would see and trying to figure out what we can do. And obviously I want to, reach people, and I am heartbroken and scared and still really shocked that there are so many people who I think are just not realizing when you start to erode rights for one set of people, it is just a matter of time before you're eroding rights for all people. It's how it works. And I will give this administration credit that they're very carefully going after cases that they know their supporters are not going to object to, and testing to see how much power can we exert here and how much can we erode these constitutional rights. Because if we can erode them for this set of people, we've eroded them, and that's all we need. It's scary. And I really hope people start to understand, I hope when you see a United States citizen get thrown into jail, where his mom has to go running to court with his birth certificate, like, I hope people are starting to understand this is some scary stuff here. And it does really, it's a real heartbreak for me that there are a lot of people who won't care until it's affecting them personally. And I think that's something to really think about, like, why is it that you're not really going to care unless it's impacting you? And that's what I was saying earlier. It's just like not enough thought being given to like how things are for other people, generally. But I, yeah, I haven't lost hope yet. I'm hanging on, I'm hanging on. There are days where it's really hard. I wrote about, I did write about it in the Snow White essay. I wrote about the the king, and kind of imagined him as the kind of person who would kiss a comatose person, right? And I named him Brock, not accidentally. And some of Chanel Miller wrote an incredible memoir. And, there are a lot of tentacles to this situation that we find ourselves in. And you can kind of pull on one thread and you'll find yourself, you'll find the entire problem there. It's until we start understanding that we're all connected, and that, if one of us is suffering, if one of us is being treated like an object, if one of us doesn't have a way to fight back and have power, then we're all in that situation. Until we get that, we're going to continue to be in trouble. And so I hope that, on some level, maybe just going back to fairy tales and pointing these things out, I'm hoping maybe that will start to, I'm trying all the different things I can think of, to just like shift the conversation or at least get people's wheels spinning. I know it's painful for those of us who are like-minded about this stuff and who are feeling heartbroken and feeling scared, just to try not to lose hope and to try to be in communication and in community with other people who are also feeling these things, because it helps. Sometimes you're like, you feel like you're in the upside down world, right? You're like, wow, this is so this is wild. People are saying things, you're like, this is absolutely like backward or upside down. It really is, So just for your own sanity and for your own well-being, just to surround yourself with people who are able to lift you up when you're struggling, and to keep trying to fight the good fight and call things out and do what you can to fight back and just take it day by day. And also remember to like take care of yourself too, because it's not easy. And the last thing I'll tell you is I think it was a couple months ago now, I was talking about these titer tests for people, like just to check your measles, right? And I was born in 1971. And a couple of my friends went and got the titer tests for measles just to see, like, did they still have the antibodies? And two of my close friends who are like, one of them is born 3 days apart from me, same year, 3 days apart. She needed a booster. And then one of my other friends is born like a year, I think he's born a year after me. He needed a booster. I went and got the titer test. I had no antibodies at all. So I just got the MMR shot. So I'm not, but you might just want to check that if you are like, I was born in 1971. You might just want to check, especially if you travel. I'm about to travel. That's why I did it. I was like, let me just check that. And I was really kind of shocked. Like, I had zero antibodies at all. And since we are Measles are back apparently. So, I mean, not apparently, there's an outbreak in West Texas, and we've had 3 deaths for the first time in this country since 2000. So maybe that's something you wanna look into also. I'm sending you a lot of love out there, and you're not alone. Um, you're not alone, and if you need help, you know where to find me. And I think it's time for us to write better stories, and to have compassion for ourselves. Like, if you are feeling like you're at this point in the story and you thought things would feel different, uh, you're also not alone in that. And sometimes just like you have to be the hero of your own story and write a better ending. Like, if you're at the middle, you just write a new adventure. It's like choose your own adventure from the 80s. Like, just make a different choice. Yep, it can be really scary, but it's okay. Like, we grew up on stories that were not, they were so skewed and toxic that it's not a surprise if you kind of like that stuff influenced the choices you made and the things that you thought you should want or were supposed to do, and you find yourself in the middle of the story. This is, as far as I know, for sure, right? I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know what happens next, because I don't. I know I have this life. If this is the life I have and it feels like I need to start making some different choices, I'm not going to waste any time. If you have to make different choices, then you have to make different choices. I have to write a different story. Get at it. That's what I think. So, you know where to find me if you need some help, and I'm sending you a lot of love. Until next time.